for what we hope will be a very interesting session for you. My name is Micah White. I'm from New York, and I am an executive editor at National Geographic Learning. And in my role, I focus on developing ELT programs for both young learners and teenage learners as well. And I'm here today with my colleague, Janine, and I'll let Janine introduce herself.
Thanks, Micah. Hi, I am Janine Boylan, and I'm the publisher for content-based English programs with National Geographic Learning. I happen to be on the other side of the United States from Micah. I'm in California.
Thanks, Janine. So in today's webinar, we're going to explore how working with authentic global content can help your students develop their social and emotional skills, which will help prepare them to connect more with themselves and with each other and with the world around them. So let's get started. Now, throughout today's session, we want to interact with you as much as we can, but because we're in a webinar format and we can't speak directly to you, we need to be creative in how we can have this interaction. So today we're going to use a program called Mentimeter, which is a fun and very simple tool that will allow you to respond to some of our questions, and we can visualize your responses in real time. And I think it's also quite fun for the audience to use as well. Using Mentimeter is very simple. You can join us with a smartphone, or you can also use a computer or a tablet if you don't have a phone with you right now, but I would certainly recommend a phone though, if you have one available. So to join us, you can open a web browser on your phone and go to menti.com, that's MENTI.com, and enter this code you see here, 43471527. And another very simple way, if you're familiar with QR codes, is you can just scan this code that you see and it'll automatically join us. I see some of you are already clicking the thumbs up button, and that's really helpful. That shows us that you're connected. So we'll give a minute or two for you to join us on Mentimeter. Lots of those thumbs up coming in, all different colors. That's great. If you have any problem joining on Mentimeter, you can also post responses, of course, in the chat, and we'll see them there too.
And that top line will be on every slide that says how to access it if you forget as we go through the presentation.
Yeah. So let's try it out. We already have a first question today. So to start us off, I'd like to get everyone's thoughts about social emotional learning, which is an educational method that we'll be discussing quite a bit in today's session. Now, I imagine that each of you has a different level of experience or background with social emotional learning. So please take a look at each of these 4 statements. They are, I know what social emotional learning is now. I knew what social emotional learning was before the COVID-19 pandemic started. I teach social emotional learning now. And I follow a specific social emotional learning framework in my class. So please take a moment to give a rating from 1 to 5 to each of these statements, with 1 being that you strongly disagree with the statement, 5 meaning that you strongly agree, and the other numbers in between, somewhere on that spectrum. I'll give everyone a moment or two to make their selection.
As a reminder, the code is at the top of the screen at the slide here. So when you go to menti.com, the code is 43471527. I saw a request in the chat for that.
Thanks, Janine. So the responses we're seeing here are really interesting. And it shows that there is indeed a wide range of experience and knowledge of social emotional learning. So I hope that in our session today, for those of you who have a very strong background in it, that perhaps we can reinforce particular concepts and also provide you with some new ideas and new examples of how you might be able to use this educational method in your classroom. And for those of you who are somewhat new to the concept of social emotional learning, hopefully this will provide a very solid foundation for you to become even more interested in it and perhaps look for other resources after this webinar as well. So here's an overview of the areas we'll be discussing throughout the next 45 minutes or so. Today, we'll look at what global citizenship is and why it's important for students now and in the future as well. We're going to talk about what social emotional learning is and the impact it can have on students and why it seems to be the buzziest term in education these days, one of them anyways. We'll also think about the relationship between global citizenship and social emotional learning because they do have quite a strong connection. And for most of the session, we'll look at what some of the ways are that you can use authentic content in your classroom to bring social emotional learning to your students and help them develop as global citizens in a world that is constantly changing. Now, to get us thinking about some of the areas that I just mentioned, I wanted to share a quote which I really love. This is from renowned educator Paulo Freire, and he said that education does not change the world. Education changes people, and people change the world. Now, I think that most people would agree that throughout our world right now, we would all benefit from particular changes in many different ways. And the concepts that we're going to be covering today are focused on helping your students be prepared to make such changes as they develop, as they grow their skills, as they mature, to be responsible citizens, making choices and affecting change, not only now, but in the future as well. Because being able to navigate a complicated world and make changes are some of the main goals of both social emotional learning and global citizenship, which is what we'll turn to next. Over to you, Janine.
Thanks, Micah. Just as Micah said, we are going to talk about social emotional learning, but let's actually start with a different topic, and that is global citizenship. Can you please pull your phones out again, and please take a minute and type in what comes to mind when you hear the term global citizenship. How would you define that term? Being able to understand global issues. I see in the chat, multicultural, embrace other cultures. How we treat the world and the people in it.
That's great.
Yeah.
We have global perspectives in the chat.
People who have human rights and responsibilities to make the world a better place. Living and working wherever you want. We are the same all around. Things everybody has in common. Interconnected, interdependent societies. Open and understand each other despite differences. Personal respect and respect for others. See lots of notes in the chat too. Teaching students about culture, globally competitive, a lot of cultures, respecting other cultures, coexisting with different people, learning from them, having awareness of being part of the world's issues and taking part in, I missed it, the scroll, in contributing or offering solutions. Great, wow, these are fantastic. Yeah, great. That's great. Lots of really good ideas. Why don't we go ahead and jump to the next slide, Micah? Spring forth from these ideas and talk about at least how the United Nations Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization, or UNESCO, how they define global citizenship. They say global citizenship is a sense of belonging to a broader community and common humanity, promoting a global gaze that links the local to the global and the national to the international. It's also a way of understanding, acting, and relating oneself to others and the environment in space and in time, based on universal values through respect for diversity and pluralism. In this context, each individual's life has implications in day-to-day decisions that connect the global with the local and vice versa. So you all brought a lot of those ideas in your responses. So that's great. Thank you. So a global citizenship education or a classroom or educational institute that includes global citizenship in their values nurtures a respectful, inclusive, and interactive ethos, includes learner-centered and culturally responsive teaching approaches, assists students in understanding a larger picture of themselves and the world in relation to their local circumstances, promotes critical thinking and creativity, is empowering, and is solution-oriented, builds social skills such as empathy and conflict resolution and communication skills and aptitudes for networking and interacting with people of different backgrounds, origins, cultures, and perspectives. So again, several of you had shared those ideas in your responses. So let's take another poll. Pull out your phones again. Does your school include global citizenship instruction? You can vote yes all the time, sometimes no, or never.
And Janine, if I can add, if any of you would like to share any more information with us, feel free to add it into the chat. For example, if your school doesn't ever include global citizenship and you want to let us know why, please feel free to share that information with us.
Okay, it's interesting to see the numbers jump there. It's pretty even between yes and no, never, but that sometimes has the biggest bar, at least right now.
And in the chat, we have quite a few nevers and sometimes as well.
And Stephen points out in name only, not in practice. That's interesting. Mm-hmm. Okay, great.
Would you like me to move on, Janine?
Yeah, thank you. So social emotional skills. What are social emotional skills? Several of you noted that you know what social emotional learning is. You kind of were in the about 3 out of 5 area there in the poll that we did. So the Organization for Economic and Cultural Development, or OECD, defines social emotional skills as the ability to regulate one's thoughts, emotions, and behavior. And this organization categorizes these skills into 5 areas of openness to experience, conscientiousness, emotional stability, extroversion, and agreeableness. You can go to the next slide, Micah. So we gave you a little taste of what social emotional skills might be according to the OECD, but what comes to mind when you hear that term, social emotional skills? Empathy. Okay, there's our code.
Yeah, that's helpful for everyone.
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
I see in the chat, able to work with a team, self-regulation. Yeah. Respect.
That's interesting.
Interaction. And at the same time, interactions with society and environment came up in the chat. Understand one's emotions.
Thoughts about feelings. Yeah.
Feelings, compassions. In the chat, embrace the differences.
Connect with all people we have. I like that.
These word visuals are fun because the words get larger the more votes that it gets. So it seems like empathy remains our top vote getter for what comes to mind when you hear social emotional skills. Great. All right, well, let's, I appreciate all these thoughts. Let's go ahead to the next slide, Micah. So what is social emotional learning? Social emotional learning is the lifelong process through which all young people and adults acquire and apply the knowledge, skills, and attitudes to develop healthy identities, manage emotions, achieve personal and collective goals, feel and show empathy for others, establish and maintain supportive relationships, make responsible and caring decisions. I should have noted that this definition comes from the Collaborative for Academic, Social, and Emotional Learning, an organization known as TESOL, who was one of the first to introduce a framework for social emotional learning about 25 years ago. But their definition of what social emotional learning is, a lot of you expressed those ideas in what you said comes to mind when you think of social emotional skills. So sounds like we're all thinking in the same line.
Janine, can I add something to this quickly?
Please.
Just to say that many of the examples we're going to eventually show you today, a lot of them deal with examples in curriculum for young learners and teenage learners. But as this definition shows, social emotional learning is a lifelong process, and it's completely relevant for adult learners as well. So we're hoping that a lot of what we talk about you can use as inspiration for how, if you teach adults, how you could weave this into your classroom as well.
It's a really good point, Micah. And to build on that, you'll find that a lot of our examples also are for language learners and maybe literature and language type classes. But these, just as Micah said, you can apply them to all age levels. We hope that you'll see how you could apply them to different subject areas as well. So is social emotional learning worth the time to include in a curriculum? A lot of studies have been done around this very question. And I wanted to share the results of one sample study. This study was done in 2017, and it was done with 82 programs that were reviewed, including 38 outside of the United States. 97,000 students from kindergarten through middle school were involved. And the researchers looked at these students from 6 months to 18 years after they had gone through the social emotional learning program. What they found is students who had a strong social emotional learning curriculum had a higher academic performance, had stronger social emotional learning skills, had positive attitudes and positive social behaviors. They found that these students had fewer conduct problems, less emotional distress, and less drug use. The higher social and emotional competencies among SEL students at the end of the intervention was the best predictor of long-term benefits. And one of the things that I think is very interesting about this study is that the benefits were the same, regardless of the socioeconomic background, the student's race, or the school location. So it's a pretty positive support for the power of social and emotional learning. We mentioned that we saw a connection between global citizenship and social emotional learning. And now that we've defined those two terms and had you think about them as well, I wanted to put the two definitions side by side so that you also might see how the two things go together. I've taken the liberty of bolding some of the words in the definitions to kind of bring out the things that are reflective of global citizenship and social emotional learning. So global citizenship, relating oneself to others, respect for diversity and pluralism. Each individual's life has implications in day-to-day decisions, where social emotional learning is developing healthy identities, showing empathy, maintaining supportive relationships, make responsible and caring decisions. We don't have a poll for this, but I'm just curious, what do you think about this? Does this resonate with you? Do you see the connection between social emotional learning and global citizenship? If you could just take a minute and type your ideas in the chat. Okay, that's great. I'm glad to see you see the match too. Excellent.
That's great. Okay, thanks, Janine. So now that we've looked at what social emotional learning is and the impact it can have on students, and also how it relates to global citizenship, I'd like to know which social emotional learning framework you use if you are using one currently. So check your phones for this question. What framework are you using right now? Now, we have included a number of the more common frameworks that are out there, such as TESOL, International Baccalaureate Learner Profile, the C Learning Framework. These are all widely used, and we've included some others as well. But there are many, many other frameworks. So if you use one that's not listed here, please select Other. And if your school is not using a framework right now, please select the None option. This would be really helpful for us to see. We'll just give a moment for everyone to think about this and make their selection. I'll check the chat.
Looks like there are a few nuns in the chat.
Some nuns. It seems like None is leading the way on the Mentimeter too. We have a couple for Character Lab. That's a really interesting organization.
Practice is growing.
Great. This is really interesting. And I'm going to move on, but if you want to add any other comments around the framework we use, please drop those in the chat because we can review these after the webinar. It will be very helpful for us. So social emotional learning has different areas of focus depending on which framework you use. But if you look at many of the frameworks we just listed or any others, you'll see that there are quite a few similarities among these frameworks in what they cover. Now, today we're going to be drawing upon CASEL, the organization that Janine mentioned previously. We're going to be looking at their SEL framework. And their framework includes 5 key areas for student development. Those areas are self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, relationship skills, and responsible decision-making. We'll discuss each one of these areas in detail as we go along. But what we'd like to focus on today are some examples that show how you might be able to work with these areas in your classroom to support your students' growth as global citizens, as we were talking about before. And we hope that these examples can highlight something fundamental about SEL instruction. And that is that you don't need a separate SEL class period or a separate SEL lesson plan to be able to effectively include this type of instruction in your classroom. What we hope to show you is that it can really be built into whatever subject area you're focusing on, whatever type of activity or lesson you're working with. It's very flexible, and we hope that that's a key takeaway for you after we go through these examples. But first, let's turn to each of these 5 areas. So the first area of social emotional learning we're going to look at is self-awareness. And I could guess that some of you may have heard this term before. So what do you think this involves? Think about that term self-awareness and use your phones to let us know which one of these categories you think relates most closely to the concept of self-awareness. We have managing stress, identifying emotions, respecting others, and making good decisions. Just wait for just a moment. Got identifying emotions quite a bit in the chat. That seems to be leading the way here on the poll as well. We have a couple for making good decisions. Some for managing stress. Great, this is really helpful. Thanks for participating. And it looks like most people have chosen identifying emotions, which is correct according to Castle's framework. But in fact, the other areas here are all very closely related to self-awareness as well, because you need self-awareness or being able to identify your emotions in order to manage stress, in order to respect others, and in order to make good decisions. So these areas, while they are distinct within a framework, they're very, very closely related when it comes to the actual personal experience that we all have. And you'll see these skills come up again and again as we talk about other areas of social emotional learning, and you'll be able to see how tightly they interact with each other. So let's dig a little deeper with self-awareness. The area of self-awareness has a number of specific competencies that students can work on. And most of these involve students looking inwardly and developing the language to discuss what they find when they are examining themselves or examining their own thoughts and their own emotions. Now, here you can see a lesson from a program called Look and See. This is one of our programs for very young learners, so kindergarten age children. Take a look at this lesson for just a moment. Let your eyes move over the page and see if you can find the opportunity for students to learn about self-awareness. I'll give you a moment to look at everything on this page. If you think you found it, maybe leave a note in the chat. We don't have a poll for this, but if you found the project, I don't think you can see my cursor on here, but if you found the project where you see those faces that a student has made, then you're correct. So with this project, students are focusing on their emotions. Even at a very young age, they're thinking about their emotions, how they're feeling, and they're able to practice this skill and develop language that goes along with this skill and being able to share your emotions with others and think about your emotions and verbalize them. Now, this type of focus is one of the foundational aspects of self-awareness. And that's to help students understand and identify their emotions and how those emotions and feelings can influence their behavior when they're inside the classroom, when they're at home, when they're with their friends. And I wanted to point out here that hands-on projects like these, especially for young learners, are a really useful and fun way to bring social emotional learning into the classroom, because a project like this can result in a physical, tangible output, but relates to the student's internal state. And students can use these projects to practice language as they're on their English journey.
So here's another example of how you can teach social self-awareness, Social emotional learning can both be directly taught and kind of taught as part of another lesson. So this is an example of it being taught as part of another lesson. This is a fictional story called Those Shoes. It happens to be in our elementary Reach Higher language and literacy program. The story is about little Jeremy, who really wants a new pair of shoes. And as he, in his desire for his new shoes, he recognizes his transition of feelings from jealousy over others who have these shoes, shame for his own shoes that he has at the time, hope when he gets a new pair of shoes, anger when they don't fit, and finally to joy when he gives those new shoes to a friend who can use them. So as I mentioned, this journey of self-awareness is part of a language and literacy program. Social emotional learning is actually not the main instructional focus. Students are learning reading comprehension skills, but in the process, they're going to be learning and discussing Jeremy's journey of self-awareness in depth. So implicitly, they are learning about the skill.
So the next key area of social emotional learning is self-management, which is very closely related to self-awareness that we were just discussing. So while self-awareness involves students looking inwardly to identify their emotions and thoughts. Self-management lessons and activities can help students know what to do with that information about themselves. Activities grounded in self-management can help students manage their emotions, their thoughts, their behaviors effectively in many different situations so that they can achieve their goals and also so that they can overcome challenges that they may run up against and that they certainly will run up against at some point. Now, there are many ways that you can bring self-management concepts into the English classroom. One way is to include explicit instruction and activities on values. For example, some common values that you might teach in a classroom are taking care of your health or embracing challenges, which you can see here. But values are a really great way to model self-management strategies for students and get them talking about their goals and how they might be dealing with obstacles in their life. And values instruction can be very flexible as well, which is helpful for teachers. You can include it in a variety of lessons. So here on the left, you see we have an entire lesson devoted to values. This one is about, staying healthy, taking care of your body. But you can also include values in other areas. So another example here on the right is how we have included a value within a song. So students are practicing language they've learned, reinforcing that language through a song, but at the same time thinking about a particular self-management strategy. For this example, it's around challenging yourself.
And here's another example of teaching self-management. This is a sample unit from a middle school language and literacy program we have that's called LIFT. So this unit is this program, to start with, has units of inquiry. And so in this sample unit, the unit topic is stress. And the overarching question is, what are the positive and negative effects of stress? So over about 4 weeks of study, students will read several fiction and nonfiction selections that have to do with stress. And they all have different viewpoints and different information. For example, that one that's humor helps, that's one of the reading passages that they would read about how humor helps with stress. They also will study things like this infographic here to have an understanding of the science behind what happens in your brain when you are stressed. They'll watch several videos, including finding out about how stress affects people's actions. With every lesson, they have academic discussions that are focused on self-management topics like managing emotions and stress management strategies. So they're building their language and literacy skills at the same time as they are learning about and intentionally discussing self-management. Plus, this unit concludes with a call to action. So after they've learned all of this about self-management and stress, now they're going to do a project, and they can choose to either do a project to manage their own stress, or they can choose to do a project to help someone else manage their stress. So let's do another poll. We've talked about self-awareness and self-management as two of the aspects of social emotional learning, and talked about different ways that you could bring that focus into the classroom. What other ideas do you have for how to bring self-awareness or self-management focus into the classroom? Share your ideas. Role play, yeah, using puppets, personalization activities, and maybe just asking questions, yeah, like what motivates you when you wake up, games, mindfulness activities.
Mm-hmm.
I'm seeing more games in the chat. Sharing competitions, mental health
Mental
check-ins.
health. That's a good one.
Yeah, showing a video. Right. Performing some real situations in class, using an emotion board. Oh, that's interesting. Yeah.
That's a great idea.
Yeah. Verbal gifts. Oh, I'd love to hear more about what that is. I love that phrase. Using pictures of current events. Oh goodness, yeah. Making infographics.
Emotions check-in. That's a great one. Even starting your class with "How are you feeling today" is a great first step.
Absolutely. Serving and keeping others around. Nice. Oh, someone in the chat mentioned emojis. Certainly. Shops, trying things.
These are all really good suggestions.
Yeah, they are. I love learning from one another.
Mm-hmm.
Some memes to represent emotions, drawing their own emotions. Yep. Yep. Great ideas. Thank you so much. Right, should we go to the next slide? Okay, so another aspect of social emotional learning is social awareness. Social awareness is about understanding the perspectives of others and empathizing with others, including those from diverse backgrounds. This is one area that connects really nicely with global citizenship as well.
Mm-hmm.
So what we're showing on the screen here is an example from our kindergarten program called Reach for the Stars. And in this program, there are specific social emotional learning activities. So I talked previously about social emotional learning that will happen in the context of a story, or we've talked about songs or other things like that. This is a lesson that is specifically for social emotional learning. And in these lessons, students will first watch a video, which one of you mentioned using videos for social emotional learning. So you are previewing what, what we're doing here. Students will watch a video about people exemplifying the skill, and then they'll answer a few questions to ensure that they comprehend, and they will do a speaking activity to talk about it. So let's show you one of those videos.
We all have feelings. Sometimes we feel sad. Sometimes we feel angry. Sometimes we feel proud. And sometimes we feel frightened. Feelings are okay, but we all want to feel happy. How can we make others feel happy? We can listen when a pal is sad or angry and laugh with them too. We can share our things and take turns too. We can be kind to people and animals and take care of nature too. We can celebrate with others and say please and thank you too. We can work with others and be a good sport too.
Well, we've got some hearts on that, Janine. I don't know if you saw that. That's really nice.
Nice.
Now, video can be a very effective social emotional learning tool for all ages, especially for younger ages, as you just saw, but also for students as they mature and progress through their schooling. And video is effective because it's a way to help students experience real situations that happen to real people. And this can help students develop their social awareness, which deals with, as Janine mentioned, understanding the perspectives of other people and empathizing with them. For example, in this lesson you see here, which is from one of our middle school programs called Impact, students watch a video and learn about a concept called crisis mapping and how this very sophisticated process can help people all over the world when they experience an emergency, such as an earthquake or other situations which can negatively affect the lives of people all over the world. So this video that students watch may introduce a new concept, but it's exposing them to challenges that people are facing and asking students to think deeply about how those people would be feeling in those situations. And then also in this lesson, students research and discuss an earthquake that happened in Nepal, which gives them the opportunity to not only apply language they've learned in this lesson, but also to think more deeply about the needs and situations of people who lived through that experience, which is really a key element of social awareness. So using this type of real global content, especially through video, but also through other areas as well, this is a natural springboard to expose students to other people's perspectives, to help them develop empathy and compassion, and really to shine a spotlight on diverse people and diverse places, which is absolutely critical for both social emotional learning and global citizenship education as well. So let's get your phones out again, or maybe they've been out this whole time. We mentioned that video can be a very useful tool for bringing SEL into the classroom. So I'm curious, how often do you use video? Is it all the time, sometimes, occasionally, or never? Let us know how you use video. Sometimes, all the time, they're competing.
Lots of sometimes in the chat too.
That's right. And again, please use the chat to, for example, if you never use video or you rarely use video and you want to let us know why that is, it would be great for us to hear that information from you. So please feel free to leave us comments about that in the chat. This is great. Well, it seems like the majority of people who are responding use video at least sometimes, or many of them all the time. So we really feel that video is a great way. I mean, it's a very useful tool for education in general, but especially for social emotional learning. It can really highlight many situations that can help students develop their social awareness skills.
So next in Castle's framework, the next area of focus is relationship skills. And relationship skills include communicating effectively, developing positive relationships, demonstrating cultural competency, practicing teamwork and collaborative problem solving, resolving conflicts constructively, resisting negative social pressure, showing leadership in groups, seeking or offering support and help when needed, standing up for the rights of others. Probably in that list, you heard several things that relate to global citizenship as well. Classroom routines are a great way to build students' relationship skills. Routines can be set at the beginning of the school year and then regularly used and practiced throughout the year. I'm showing some routines here that are for group discussions as an example. So in these routines, students have specific roles in the discussion, such as a facilitator or an encourager. There are language frames here that they can use to support their role. They learn to be a leader in the group. They learn to listen to others' perspectives and build on the ideas that are shared. They learn to ask for clarification to make sure they understand what others are saying and that their communication is clear. And they're responsible for summarizing, which means they need to consider what everyone said. Routines like these lead to effective communication, positive relationships, collaborative problem solving, and supporting one another. And then as a routine, all of this happens in a safe, comfortable environment that they practice regularly.
Thanks, Janine. Now, another way to help students develop their relationship skills, while also helping them be very engaged, is to expand the ways that students think about relationship skills. We often think of relationship skills as being within a human context, and many times they are in a student's daily life. But many of these relationship skills, such as communication, teamwork, collaboration, problem solving, and more, many of these can be found all throughout the natural world. And focusing on content outside of the human experience can be a really effective way to give students a new lens through which to see different aspects of themselves and actually how they may interact with others. So in the examples you see here, both of which are from one of our programs for teenagers, students learn about relationship skills and group behavior in things like ants, fish, birds, human cells, and more. And they're asked to think about the connections between these types of relationship skills and the relationship skills that they exhibit as humans in their own lives. So content that deals with if you want to bring in content like this, say using the natural world as a springboard to think about relationship skills, it's really helpful if you could combine that approach with activities and projects that also have students apply those skills. And some of these activities may involve pair work, group discussions, small group or whole class projects. This relates to many of the routines Janine was just telling you about. So different structures for how students can get together, because these types of activities require students to interact with and sort of navigate different personalities in their classroom and in the wider world, different language proficiencies, different backgrounds, and many different opinions from their classmates and their friends. And through all of this practice and all of these activities, students will be able to apply the skills they're learning about and really develop and deepen their own relationship skills with others. Okay, so think about your classroom. And we'd like to know if you work on building relationship skills with your students, how would you rate each of these statements? I regularly work on relationship skills with my students. I use routines in my classroom to build relationship skills. And I would use the natural world as a model for building relationship skills. I love seeing the numbers jump around. There's something thrilling about it. It's some really strong responses so far. We're in the 4s. In the chat, we have some people saying they would use the natural world as a model. That's great. This is really good to see. And to just quickly bring this back to the concept of global citizenship, if you think about global citizenship as preparing students to be able to function in an effective way in a very complex world, then relationship skills are absolutely critical. So actually bringing them in and focusing on them even at a very young age, or in a variety of different subjects that you may be teaching, will only benefit your students in the long run. I'm going to move on now, but thanks for taking the poll. Okay, so we've made it to the final area of the social emotional learning framework, which is responsible decision making, and this is a big one. So students who develop in the area of responsible decision making are able to do a number of things. They can think critically about information. They can analyze problems and solutions. They display curiosity, and they can reflect on their personal choices and the impact that their choices have. And if you think back to one of the key elements of global citizenship, that each person has the ability to affect the world around them, then it's clear that helping students develop responsible decision-making skills is quite critical. So how could you do that in the English language learning classroom? There are many ways, but One that I find particularly effective is to use topics that lend themselves to thinking about personal choices and the impact of such personal choices, and to, as much as possible, make these topics less abstract and more connected to your students' own daily experience, even if the topic is very different. So there are many topics that you could use for this that are regularly featured in the English classroom, such as food, clothing, transportation, and the environment, which we're going to look at here. The more students get interested in a topic, especially if they can connect it to their own life, then the more that they will care about it. And when students care about an issue, they'll be in a much better position to think about how they can make responsible decisions about that issue, even if it does seem a little bit removed from their life. One challenge in this area is to help students care about issues that don't feel very close to their immediate experience. For example, here you can see a portion of a unit on animal habitats. This is from one of our primary programs called Our World. Now, animal habitats and making responsible decisions with respect to animal habitats, this is an issue that may not feel immediately relevant to students, especially those who live in dense urban environments, for example. But this unit allows students to spend a significant time learning about various habitats, thinking about how these habitats have similarities, in fact, to where they live, and talking about why it's important to protect such habitats, just like it's important to protect your own space around you. And throughout this unit, students are not just receiving information and language about this topic, but they're learning and thinking about, and they're discussing, they're singing songs about, and hopefully they're increasing the care that they have for all the life within these habitats they're learning about. And perhaps most importantly, they're spending time connecting the idea of this animal habitats to their own lives. Students will experience this topic through images, songs, readings, projects, videos, values, pair and group work, projects, and much more. So that by the end of the unit, even if this topic is very distant from their own life, students will have developed a deeper connection to it. And with that deeper connection, they'll be in a much better position to think about how they can make responsible decisions when it comes to the environment and all of the life that is within it.
And another example of teaching responsible decision making is from our middle school LIFT program. And I'm sure you'll make the connection to global citizenship as well. So this is a first-person account where this young leader appeals directly to other youth to stand up for good. And he details his journey to leadership and then gives advice to other teens on how to find their own voices. As with other reading in this program, students will read and discuss the text, but they're going to do that with a specific purpose of why is it important to lead by example. So with this selection, they will not only be deepening their comprehension of the reading, but they'll be deepening their understanding of responsible decision-making. And their example is their peer. It's not a celebrity or adult or someone that they might not relate to, but someone their own age and someone like them. All right, this is our last poll. So today we have talked about global citizenship, we've talked about social emotional learning, and we've shown several examples of authentic content. So what we would like you to do is take a minute and think back on everything you've heard today and think about what you can take back and use in your class.
In the chat, we have all ideas, so that's great to see.
Lots of votes for all. That's great. Oh, great. Someone wants to investigate the CASEL definitions and brainstorm more ways to use it. Good. I love that that this has sparked your curiosity. That's fantastic.
I would just put I'd like to put a plug for CASEL. So if you want to know more, you could go to casel.org. We're not affiliated with them at all, but they have some very, very useful resources and information about social emotional learning, and also a ton of research if you're interested in seeing what the research shows. Janine gave you a little bit of that information, but there's really a lot. There's a wealth of information on their website.
I love seeing people are going to do emotional check-ins every day. Strategies for teaching SEL, pay more attention to students' emotional being, teaching the skills, self-awareness, applying the ideas. I'm glad to see the takeaway that SEL can be integrated into any lesson. Glad that stuck. Using text to teach emotional skills, excellent. Emotional activities to make our lessons meaningful, long-lasting, memorable. Great. Good. I'm glad to see that tonight sparked some new ideas.
Oh, this is really great.
Yeah. Someone's mentioning about creating units. That's great. And yes, that there are numerous benefits of teaching students how to identify their emotions and share their feelings. Excellent.
That's great. Well, that is the end of our presentation. We don't have a whole lot of time left for Q&A, but we do have a couple minutes. So Emily, do you want to speak to the Q&A section?
Yeah, if anyone has any questions, just feel free to drop them in the Q&A box. There is one we have here just asking about social and emotional learning skills and the relation to emotional intelligence.
I would say that emotional intelligence is certainly a part of the social emotional learning framework that we discussed today, and that that concept of emotional intelligence certainly relates to self-awareness and self-management in particular. I mean, it's as I mentioned before, these concepts and terms are all very closely related, but I think that if you want to spend some time looking into the self-awareness and self-management strands, you'll find a lot of connections to the ideas around emotional intelligence.
Mm-hmm. Great. And one other question from Sherry. She's asking, what are the questions you would ask when doing an emotion check-in besides just how are you?
I think even broadening that to how are you feeling right now, right? Being more specific. I think how are you is used so often that it's almost like a greeting rather than a genuine question. So how are you feeling today? How are you feeling right now? How are you feeling in a specific situation? For example, a student took an exam or a student just played a competitive game and they lost. You'd say, how are you feeling because of that, right? And to try to get them to open up to you in a genuine way. Janine, is there anything you'd like to add about that?
And often allowing them to answer in different ways. Just sometimes allowing them to draw their response to that, or to, pick an emoji. I know someone mentioned that before. Sometimes even that opens up the responses.
Yep. And just last question, I think we have time for here, but it's from Anna, and she's asking if social emotional learning can be implemented in college classes.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yes, it is a lifelong process. I would say it's even something that I know my